German U-boat crews experienced Allied sonar, then realized they are now visible to enemy. May 25, 1941, North Atlantic, 500 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland. The young midshipman's hand trembled as he gripped the periscope handles, not from fear of the enemy above, but from what he had just heard echo through the steel hull of U-557. A metallic ping, sharp and unnatural, struck the submarine's hull and reverberated through every compartment. Frizz Zur C, Herbert Verer would later write in his private journal, discovered decades after the war, the sound was like nothing we had trained for. It rang through our boat like a church bell announcing our funeral. The British had found us beneath the waves. For 3 years, German U-boat crews had operated with near impunity, believing the ocean depths provided sanctuary from enemy detection. They had been taught that submerging meant disappearing, that the dark waters would cloak them as effectively as night cloaked a surface raider. On this spring morning in 1941, 22-year-old Verer and 48 other men aboard U-557 learned a terrifying truth: the ocean no longer hid them. The Allies possessed technology that could see through water itself. What none of these submariners understood was that this single ping represented the opening movement of a technological symphony that would transform submarine warfare forever. Over the next 4 years, German U-boat crews would experience a systematic psychological demolition as Allied sonar and detection systems evolved from crude experimental devices into precision hunting tools. The mathematics of underwater warfare were being rewritten not in torpedo calculations, but in sound waves that would expose the U-boat force to destruction on an unprecedented scale. The collapse of German submarine dominance had begun. The journey toward this moment had started 23 years earlier, in the final months of World War I. British and French scientists, desperate to counter the Kaiser's U-boats that had nearly starved Britain into submission, began experimenting with underwater sound detection. The Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Division, working in shore-based laboratories, developed the first primitive sonar sets in 1918. But the armistice came before these devices could be deployed in meaningful numbers. Only 3 U-boats in the entire Great War were credited to hydrophone detection, the technology that would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare, gestated slowly during the 1920s and 1930s. British scientists at HMS Osprey, the Royal Navy's anti-submarine school at Portland, refined the basic principles. The system they developed, called ASDIC, worked by transmitting a high-frequency sound pulse through water. When this pulse struck a solid object, it reflected back as an echo. By measuring the time between transmission and echo, operators could calculate the range to a target. By rotating the transmitter, they could determine bearing. The first operational ASDIC sets went to sea in 1928 aboard British destroyers. These early units were crude affairs. The oscillator, a quartz crystal disc that converted electrical impulses into sound waves, had to be suspended over the ship's side. Range was limited to 3,500 yards in optimal conditions. The system couldn't determine depth, only direction and range. Operators using headphones had to distinguish genuine submarine echoes from returns bouncing off whales, fish schools, ship wakes, and thermal layers in the water. Yet by 1939, the Royal Navy's faith in ASDIC had grown so absolute that senior Admiralty staff believed the submarine threat had been largely overcome. Every Royal Navy destroyer carried the equipment. Training schools produced hundreds of operators. War plans assumed convoys protected by ASDIC-equipped escorts would suffer minimal losses. This confidence would prove tragically premature. September 3, 1939. Hours after Britain declared war on Germany, the passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed by U-30 west of Ireland with 117 lives lost. The Battle of the Atlantic had begun, and German U-boat commanders immediately discovered that the vaunted British anti-submarine defenses were far less formidable than advertised. Captain Lieutenant Otto C. Prien and Joachim Scheck led their boats on devastating patrols, sinking ship after ship while suffering minimal losses. Admiral Karl Donitz, commanding the U-boat force, watched with satisfaction as his submarines achieved what became known as the First Happy Time. German submariners operated with carefully cultivated confidence in their invisibility. Marine training emphasized that a submerged U-boat was essentially undetectable. The ocean, instructors taught, absorbed sound and masked movement. Hydrophones might pick up propeller noise from a surfaced submarine, but a boat running submerged on silent electric motors was a ghost. This doctrinal certainty permeated every level of U-boat operations. Feldwebel Wolfgang Hirschfeld, senior radio operator aboard U-109, recorded in his secret diary written in real time during patrols, "We believe the enemy relied on the same listening devices from the last war. We were told their hydrophones could only detect loud machinery noise. As long as we maintained silence after diving, we thought we were safe." This belief would soon be shattered. The first German U-boat crew to encounter active sonar experienced not just technological surprise but existential shock. When an Aztec pulse struck a submerged hull, it produced a distinctive sound inside the boat. Survivors described it as dropping dried peas into a tin can, a rapid series of metallic clicks that grew louder as the hunting ship approached. Unlike the steady drone of ship propellers heard through hydrophones, the sonar ping was unmistakably artificial, undeniably directional, and terrifyingly precise. Lieutenant Herbert Verer, serving as watch officer aboard U-557 during his first war patrol in May 1941, experienced his baptism under sonar detection while stalking a convoy south of Greenland. His memoir, Iron Coffins, published decades later, captured the moment. "The destroyer's Aztec found us at periscope depth. The metallic pinging grew faster, louder. Each ping struck our hull and rang through the boat. Every man froze at his station. We knew with absolute certainty that the enemy above knew exactly where we were. The hunter had become the hunted. The transformation from predator to prey happened in seconds." Verer, 22 years old and barely 6 months removed from the Naval Academy, watched as commanding officer's face transform from confident hunter to cautious survivor. Captain Lieutenant Otto Harms, a veteran of multiple successful patrols, immediately ordered a dive to 200 meters. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, but every man understood what the pinging meant. Their greatest tactical advantage, invisibility, had been stripped away by technology they barely understood. The Aztec operator aboard the British destroyer was likely a young man himself, perhaps no older than Verer. But he held an advantage that transcended experience or skill. His equipment could reach through the ocean itself, painting acoustic pictures of objects hundreds of yards distant. Each ping transmitted at 14 kilocycles, far above the range of human hearing. When these sound waves struck U-557's steel hull, they reflected back to hydrophones mounted beneath the destroyer's keel. Simple mathematics converted time delays into distance. The submarine's bearing was revealed by the direction from which the echo returned. Every movement Verer's boat made was tracked with increasing precision. What followed were 7 hours of depth charge attacks. U-557 dove to 200 meters, rigged for silent running, and crept away at minimum speed. The crew heard the destroyer's screws thrashing overhead, heard the splash of depth charges entering the water, counted seconds until the explosions. Each detonation sent shock waves through the hull. Paint chips fell from bulkheads. Light bulbs shattered. Men bled from ears and noses. The boat's structure groaned under pressure. Inside the submarine, time moved with agonizing slowness. The captain ordered all non-essential systems shut down. Electric motors ran at bare minimum, pushing the boat through water at barely 2 knots. Men moved in slow motion, if they moved at all. A dropped wrench, a slammed hatch, even heavy footsteps could give away their position. The crew sat or stood at their stations in near total silence, breathing the increasingly foul air, listening to death circling overhead. Verer recorded every detail in his memory, details that would later fill pages of his memoir. The temperature inside the boat climbed past 35 degrees Celsius. Men stripped to the waist, their skins slick with sweat. Condensation dripped from pipes and bulkheads. The air grew thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, diesel fuel, and fear. After 3 hours submerged, carbon dioxide levels rose dangerously high. Men gasped for breath, their lungs struggling to extract oxygen from air that had been recycled through 49 pairs of lungs dozens of times. The destroyer above them was relentless. The Aztec operator had solid contact and refused to lose it. Every few minutes, the metallic pinging would intensify, indicating the hunter was closing for another attack. The crew would brace themselves, gripping stanchions, pressing bodies against bulkheads. Then came the splashes, the terrible splashing sounds of depth charges entering the water. The crew counted 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 charges falling in a pattern, sometimes 10. The waiting was unbearable. 7 seconds for a charge set to 100 m, 12 seconds for 200 m, 20 seconds for 300 m. When the explosions came, the entire submarine shuddered. Closer charges lifted the boat bodily, tossing men off their feet. The hull groaned and popped. Cork insulation fell from overhead. Electrical sparks shot from control panels. Leaks appeared in the pressure hull, thin jets of seawater spraying under tremendous pressure. Damage control parties rushed to stuff wooden plugs into cracks, tighten bolts on pipe joints, and shore up weakened frames. After 7 hours, U-557 had descended to 280 m, well beyond its designed crush depth of 220 m. The hull was contracting under pressure, rivets groaning, seams weeping. But Harms knew his boat. He knew German engineering had built safety margins into the design. He also knew that rising to shallower depths meant detection and certain destruction. So he kept the boat deep, kept it silent, and waited for the destroyer's fuel or patience to run out. Finally, mercifully, the pinging stopped. The destroyer's propeller noise faded. Either the British captain had lost confidence in his Aztec contact or his fuel state forced him to return to the convoy. U-557 waited another 2 hours in the depths, then slowly, carefully began ascending. When the boat finally surfaced after 9 hours submerged, men stumbled onto the conning tower and sucked in great lungfuls of clean Atlantic air. Several vomited from the sudden oxygen rush. Others simply stood, faces turned to the sky, savoring survival. U-557 survived, as did thousands of other German submarines in the early war years. The Aztec operators aboard Allied escorts, while able to detect U-boats, faced critical limitations. The system had a dead zone. At ranges under 200 yards, the transmitted pulse and returning echo merged, creating a blind spot just as the attacking ship closed for the kill. Depth charges had to be dropped over the stern after the submarine had been lost to detection. This gave clever commanders precious seconds to execute evasive maneuvers. Moreover, Aztec performed poorly in rough seas. Temperature layers in the water, called thermoclines, bent sound waves and created shadow zones where submarines could hide. Experienced U-boat commanders learned to dive beneath thermal layers where Allied sonar beams couldn't reach. They mastered the art of silent running, shutting down all non-essential machinery and moving at speeds so slow their propellers created no cavitation. One man walking too heavily could give away a submarine's position. Through 1940 and 1941, these tactics allowed German submarines to maintain operational effectiveness despite Allied sonar. The learning curve favored experienced commanders. Men like Verer, who survived their first encounter with Aztec detection, studied the technology's weaknesses. They noted that multiple escorts, each transmitting on different frequencies, created acoustic confusion. They learned to hide within the noise barrier created by a convoy itself, where the sound of 50 merchant ships' engines and propellers masked a submarine signature. The German Navy's own underwater detection systems differed fundamentally from Allied approaches. Rather than focusing on active sonar, German engineers had developed sophisticated passive listening arrays. The Gruppenhorchgerät, or group listening device, standard equipment on U-boats from 1935 onward, consisted of 48 hydrophones mounted on each side of the bow. These could detect individual ships out to 20 kilometers and large convoys to 100 kilometers, though bearings were imprecise for torpedo attacks. This technological philosophy reflected German strategic thinking. U-boats were hunters, not prey. Their mission was finding convoys, not evading detection. The Germans had developed good listening equipment to locate targets. They assumed enemies would rely on similar passive systems. The possibility that Allied ships could actively track submerged submarines using reflected sound waves was not taken seriously. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Schulze, commander of U-48, noted in his patrol report from October 1940, the British anti-submarine measures remain inadequate. Their listening devices require us to make noise. When we maintain silent running, detection is impossible. This assessment, shared widely among U-boat commanders, would prove catastrophically wrong. The year 1942 brought devastating changes to the Atlantic battlefield, though German submariners initially failed to recognize the pattern. In February, Admiral Donat's U-boat force began operating along the American East Coast, exploiting the United States' complete unpreparedness for submarine warfare. The second happy time saw merchant ships silhouetted against brightly lit shorelines, sailing independently without escorts, sinking by the hundreds. U-boat crews called it the American shooting season, but simultaneously British and American scientists were revolutionizing anti-submarine technology. In September 1940, Britain had transferred Aztec technology to the United States for free. Recognizing that only combined Allied research capacity could develop effective countermeasures quickly enough, American engineers at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington began parallel development of what they termed Sonar, an acronym for Sound Navigation and Ranging. By early 1942, coordinated British-American research programs were producing rapid breakthroughs. The technology transfer represented an extraordinary act of wartime cooperation. British scientists arrived in Washington carrying complete blueprints, operational manuals, and even actual Aztec equipment stripped from Royal Navy destroyers. American engineers studied every detail, then applied U.S. industrial methods to improve production and performance. The British used quartz crystal transducers assembled by hand in limited quantities. Americans developed magnetostrictive transducers using nickel tubes that could be mass-produced. British Aztec used streamlined protective domes. Americans experimented with spherical domes that provided better acoustic properties. The collaboration extended beyond hardware. Royal Navy officers shared years of operational experience, teaching American anti-submarine warfare students everything learned about Aztec's strengths and weaknesses. They explained how temperature layers affected sonar beams, how submarine commanders exploited dead zones, how experienced operators distinguished submarine echoes from false returns. This knowledge transfer compressed years of learning into months, allowing American forces to deploy effective anti-submarine capabilities far faster than if they had developed the technology independently. By mid-1942, American shipyards were installing sonar equipment on every destroyer, destroyer escort, and corvette rolling off production lines. The United States Maritime Commission coordinated this massive effort to ensure standardization across all equipment. This meant parts could be interchanged between ships, operators could transfer without retraining, and tactical doctrine could be uniform across the entire anti-submarine force. The industrial scale of American production transformed sonar from a specialized British naval technology into a ubiquitous Allied anti-submarine weapon. 3 critical improvements transformed Allied sonar from a useful but limited tool into a lethal submarine killer. Power rotation systems allowed Aztec heads to scan through wider arcs more quickly, reducing the time submarines could slip past the searching escort. Manual rotation, requiring operators to turn hand cranks, was replaced by electric motors that could sweep through 90 degrees in seconds. This meant escorts could search their entire forward arc, port to starboard, in the time previously required to search a narrow slice of ocean. Streamlined steel domes replaced canvas covers, enabling escorts to maintain effective search speeds up to 20 knots instead of being limited to 15. The canvas domes used in early Aztec installations created turbulent water flow at high speeds, generating noise that masked returning echoes. Steel domes shaped by wind tunnel testing and hydrodynamic analysis allowed water to flow smoothly past the transducer, even at attack speeds, so escorts could close on submarines quickly without losing sonar contact. Dual-frequency systems operating at both 14 kilocycles and 30 kilocycles dramatically improved range and resolution. Low-frequency transmissions traveled farther through water but provided imprecise bearing information. High-frequency pulses gave sharp, detailed echoes but were absorbed quickly. By combining both frequencies, operators could detect submarines at maximum range with low frequency, then switch to high frequency for precise targeting as range closed. Some advanced systems alternated frequencies automatically, giving operators the benefits of both in a single sweep. Most revolutionary of all was the Type 147 Aztec set developed in 1943, which could track submarines in 3 dimensions. This system provided not just bearing and range, but depth. For the first time, Allied escorts could know precisely where a submarine sat in 3-dimensional ocean space. Depth charge patterns could be set with devastating accuracy. The underwater sanctuary was disappearing. German U-boat crews began experiencing these improvements as an inexplicable increase in detection rates. Oberleutnant Verer, promoted to first watch officer aboard U-230 in late 1942, recorded the change. In 1941, if we dove deep and maintained silence, escorts usually lost us within an hour. By 1943, they held contact for 5, 6, 7 hours. They always seemed to know our depth. Charges exploded at precisely our depth. It was as if they could see us. Verer's observation reflected a technological reality that German naval intelligence was slow to grasp. The Allies had not merely improved their sonar equipment, they had revolutionized it. The Type 147 Aztec could track submarines in 3 dimensions simultaneously. German U-boat tactics developed against earlier 2-dimensional systems were suddenly obsolete. Diving deep no longer provided safety. Changing course no longer broke contact. Silent running no longer guaranteed invisibility. The psychological impact of persistent sonar contact was profound. Unlike surface combat, where sailors could at least see their enemy and fight back, submarine crews under attack could only wait passively while destroyers hunted them. The steady ping-ping-ping of sonar striking the hull became a death knell. Men knew that each ping meant an escort was calculating their exact position, that depth charges were being set to their precise depth, that death could arrive in seconds with no warning except the splash of charges overhead. The sound itself was maddening. Veterans described it as a fingernail dragging across slate, amplified 1,000 times, echoing through steel. It penetrated every compartment of the submarine. Men in the forward torpedo room heard it as clearly as those in the engine spaces. There was no escaping it, no shutting it out. Some men stuffed cotton in their ears, but the sound traveled through the hull, through the deck plates, through the air. It was omnipresent, unceasing, relentless. Worse than the pinging was what it represented. Every U-boat sailor understood basic physics. Sound traveled through water at roughly 1,500 meters per second. If an Aztec operator heard an echo 2 seconds after transmitting, the submarine was 1,500 m distant. Simple division gave range, the direction from which the echo returned gave bearing. And in 1943, with the new 3-dimensional Aztec, the angle at which sound waves reflected revealed depth. The submarine had nowhere to hide. Every aspect of its position was known to the hunters above. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, whose U-109 survived multiple depth charge attacks through 1942 and early 1943, captured the terror in his diary. The pinging never stops. It follows us hour after hour. We sit in darkness to conserve battery power. The air grows foul. Carbon dioxide levels rise. Men gasp for breath. Still the pinging continues. We know they are above us, circling, waiting. When the splashes come, we count 1, 2, 5, 10 depth charges. Then we wait for the explosions, wondering if this pattern will be the one that cracks our hull and sends seawater flooding in. Hirschfeld's diary entries from early 1943 documented the deteriorating psychological state of U-boat crews. Men who had been confident warriors months earlier were becoming traumatized survivors. After particularly severe depth charge attacks, sailors would shake uncontrollably for hours. Some refused to eat, their stomachs knotted with anxiety. Others slept whenever possible, seeking escape in unconsciousness. A few broke down completely, weeping or becoming catatonic. The captains tried to maintain morale through routine and discipline. Daily drills continued. Equipment was maintained. Watches were stood. But everyone knew the truth, the ocean no longer protected them. The technology that had made submarines the most feared weapons of the last war had been countered by new technology that made them targets. The balance had shifted decisively, and there was nothing German engineering or German courage could do to shift it back. Spring 1943 brought the climactic crisis of the Battle of the Atlantic. In March, German U-boats sank 120 merchant ships, totaling almost 700,000 tons, with only 12 submarine losses. Nearly two-thirds of these sinkings occurred while ships were in convoy, the bedrock of Allied maritime defense. For 20 days in March, Admiral Donat's wolf packs came closer to severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline than at any other point in the war. The Royal Navy's official history later concluded the Germans never came so near to disrupting communications between the New World and the Old, but March 1943 represented the apex of U-boat effectiveness, not the beginning of renewed dominance. The technological and tactical balance was shifting decisively. Allied shipyards, particularly in the United States, were producing escort vessels faster than they could be sunk. Destroyer escorts, corvettes, and frigates, all equipped with improved sonar systems, began flooding into the Atlantic in massive numbers. Very long-range Liberator aircraft carrying both radar and sonobuoys closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, where U-boats had previously operated beyond land-based aircraft range. May 1943 became Black May for the Kriegsmarine. 41 U-boats were destroyed, 25% of operational strength. On May 24, Admiral Donats, shocked at these catastrophic losses, ordered the temporary withdrawal of U-boats from the North Atlantic. In his war diary, he wrote, "We are facing a situation where enemy attempts to restrict our operations have succeeded. Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have increased enormously. Our losses have become unsustainable." The statistics told a brutal story. In the first 3 weeks of May, 96 U-boats were deployed in the North Atlantic. 41 were destroyed. 43% never returned to port. For comparison, the entire year of 1941 had seen 35 U-boat losses from all causes. Black May destroyed more submarines in 3 weeks than an entire year of early war operations. The exchange rate had become catastrophic, 12 merchant ships sunk for every U-boat lost. 2 years earlier, the ratio had been 10 merchant ships per U-boat per patrol, with most boats returning safely. Now submarines were being destroyed faster than they could sink targets. Individual boat losses told the human story behind the statistics. U-463, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Leo Wolf, was detected by Aztec on May 5 while stalking convoy ONS-5. The destroyer Vedette obtained solid contact and held it despite the U-boat's evasive maneuvers. For 3 hours, Wolf tried every tactic in the German tactical manual, diving deep, changing course frequently, speeding up and slowing down, releasing bubble decoys. Nothing worked. The Aztec contact remained firm. Finally, with batteries nearly exhausted and the boat taking damage from near-miss depth charges, Wolf surfaced to fight with his deck gun. Vedette's 4-inch guns destroyed the submarine in minutes. 46 men died, 3 survived. U-192, commanded by Oberleutnant Verer, was hunted for 6 hours by escorts from convoy SC-129 on May 6. The boat dove to 300 m, far beyond its design limits. The hull groaned and popped under pressure. Leaks appeared in dozens of locations. Still, the sonar pings found them. The escorts above coordinated perfectly, one maintaining Aztec contact while others positioned for depth charge runs. When the attacks came, they were precisely targeted, charges exploded at exactly 300 m depth. The submarine's pressure hull cracked and seawater flooded in. Only 8 men escaped the sinking boat, 44 drowned. U-531, a new boat on her first patrol, was detected on May 6 by an RAF Liberator equipped with airborne radar. The aircraft surprised the submarine on the surface at night, when U-boat commanders had previously felt safe. The Liberator's lee light illuminated the boat from half a mile away. Depth charges fell before the crew could dive. The submarine was damaged but remained afloat. Escorts honed in on the radar contact, obtained Aztec contact, and finished the kill with a coordinated attack. No survivors. U-194, U-125, U-438, U-657, U-273, the list grew longer each day. Some boats were destroyed by aircraft, others fell to surface escorts. Many were hunted by combinations of air and surface forces working in perfect coordination, but nearly all were first detected by radar or sonar. The technological advantage had shifted so decisively that German submarines could barely operate. For German submarine crews still at sea during Black May, the psychological impact was devastating. Radio messages brought news of boat after boat failing to return. Friends and classmates vanished beneath the waves. The ocean, once a German hunting ground, had become a killing field where U-boats were the prey, and always, constantly, there was the pinging. The sonar pulses that revealed submarines had nowhere to hide. U-boat command tried to maintain operational effectiveness through denial. Orders from Berlin insisted losses were temporary setbacks. New tactics were transmitted to boats at sea. Commanders were told to persevere, that the tide would turn. But the men in the submarines knew better. They had experienced the relentless Aztec tracking. They had survived depth charge attacks that seemed to target their exact position. They had watched comrades die when hulls cracked under precisely placed explosions. No amount of propaganda could erase those experiences. Oberleutnant Verer, by now commanding his own boat, U-415, experienced the new reality firsthand. In his memoir he described a patrol in April 1943. We were detected within hours of reaching our operational area. For 3 days escorts hunted us relentlessly. Their sonar never lost contact. We dove to maximum depth, 300 m. The hull groaned. Rivets popped. Still the pinging found us. When we tried to escape on the surface at night, aircraft appeared with searchlights. There was no sanctuary left. We had become targets in a shooting gallery. Verer's patrol aboard U-415 would be among his shortest and most harrowing. The boat departed La Pallas on April 10, 1944, assigned to patrol the western approaches to the English Channel. Verer knew the mission was nearly suicidal. Allied air and sea patrols had made the Bay of Biscay crossing a nightmare. Submarines could no longer surface safely, even at night. The new snorkel breathing tube allowed diesel engine operation while submerged, but Allied radar could detect even this small protrusion above the waves. U-415 made it through the Bay of Biscay by remaining submerged for 18 hours at a stretch. When the boat finally reached open Atlantic waters on April 15, Verer surfaced briefly to recharge batteries fully. Within 20 minutes, an RAF Liberator appeared on the horizon. The aircraft had detected U-415's radar emissions before Verer's lookouts had spotted the plane. The submarine crash-dived with seconds to spare. Depth charges fell astern, damaging the stern torpedo tube but leaving the boat operational. For the next 60 hours, U-415 remained submerged, running on electric motors and creeping away from the patrol area at 3 knots. Verer knew that Allied hunter-killer groups coordinated their searches. An aircraft detection would bring surface escorts racing to the area. Sure enough, on April 18, Aztec pings began echoing through the hull. An escort had picked up their trail. Verer dove deeper to 250 m and slowed to silent running speed. The pinging continued. The escort above them had solid contact and maintained it hour after hour. Verer tried every evasive technique. He altered course by 90 degrees. The pinging followed. He increased speed briefly, then slowed again, hoping to confuse the Aztec operator. The pinging intensified, indicating the escort was closing. He released a Pillenwerfer bubble decoy. The pinging never wavered. The Allied operator was experienced enough to distinguish genuine submarine echoes from decoys. After 8 hours of continuous contact, depth charges began to fall. The patterns were frighteningly accurate. Explosions occurred at precisely 250 m depth, exactly where U-415 was running. Verer took the boat deeper still, to 300 m, paint peeled from bulkheads under the pressure. The hull groaned continuously. Men stood rigid at their stations, faces white with fear. The attack continued through the night and into the next morning. Verer's crew was exhausted. The boat's batteries were nearly depleted, air quality dangerously poor. He faced an impossible choice: surface and fight, certainly dying under the escort's guns, or remain submerged until batteries died, then surface and surrender, or try to outlast the hunter, hoping he would run low on fuel or depth charges. Verer chose to wait. For 16 hours, U-415 crept through the depths while death circled overhead. Finally, the pinging stopped. The escort had expended all depth charges and departed. Verer waited 4 more hours, then surfaced to find empty ocean. The boat limped back toward France. Mission aborted. Crew traumatized. U-415 never made another war patrol. She was sunk in her bunker at Toulon by Allied air attack in July 1944. Verer survived only because he was ashore when the bombs fell. The technological gap was widening. By mid-1943, Allied escorts carried not just improved sonar, but an entire anti-submarine warfare system. High-frequency direction finding, called HFDUF by operators, could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions. Radar could detect surfaced submarines at night or in fog. Sonobuoys dropped from aircraft created underwater listening networks that monitored vast areas. Ahead-throwing weapons like Hedgehog and Squid projected depth charge patterns forward while maintaining sonar contact, eliminating the dead zone that had previously allowed submarines to escape. The integration of these systems created a detection network greater than the sum of its parts. A typical convoy in mid-1943 was protected by 6 to 8 escorts, each carrying ASDIC, radar, and HFDUF. Aircraft from Iceland, Britain, or escort carriers provided air cover. The Mid-Atlantic Gap, where U-boats had previously operated beyond aircraft range, had been closed by very long-range liberators flying from Newfoundland and Northern Ireland. Every square mile of ocean the convoy traversed was monitored by multiple overlapping sensor systems. When a U-boat approached such a convoy, detection was nearly inevitable. If the boat transmitted radio signals to coordinate with other submarines, HFDUF triangulated its position and escorts raced to the area. If it surfaced at night to shadow the convoy, radar detected it and aircraft attacked. If it submerged to approach underwater, ASDIC picked up the target. The submarine had essentially 3 choices, all bad. Remains distant and unable to attack, closes on the surface and is destroyed by aircraft, closes submerged and is destroyed by escorts. The Hedgehog weapon system revolutionized anti-submarine attacks. Earlier depth charge attacks required escorts to pass over a submarine, dropping charges astern and losing ASDIC contact in the final moments of the attack. Hedgehog fired 24 small bombs forward in an elliptical pattern while the escort maintained ASDIC contact throughout the attack. Each bomb contained 35 pounds of Torpex explosive armed by contact with a hard surface. If all 24 bombs missed, they sank to the bottom without exploding, and the escort could immediately fire another pattern. If even one bomb struck the submarine's hull, the explosion would detonate adjacent bombs, creating a devastating blast that could crack pressure holes. German submarine commanders quickly learned to fear Hedgehog attacks. Unlike conventional depth charges which exploded whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog gave instant feedback. Silence meant a miss, explosions meant a hit, and hits were usually fatal. The psychological impact was significant. Depth charge attacks, while terrifying, could be survived even when charges exploded nearby. Hedgehog hits were almost always lethal. The Squid system, introduced in late 1943, was even more lethal. 3 large mortars fired patterns of 3 depth charges 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, Squid charges were set to explode at specific depths calculated by an automatic computer that processed ASDIC data. The system compensated for submarine evasive maneuvers, predicting where the target would be when charges reached the preset depth. Squid-equipped frigates achieved a kill rate of 25% per attack, compared to less than 5% for conventional depth charge attacks. German countermeasures proved woefully inadequate. The Pillenwerfer, a chemical device that created bubble streams to decoy sonar, fooled only inexperienced operators. veteran ASDIC operators quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic echo signature of bubbles from the solid return of a steel hull. After a few seconds, experienced operators could ignore Pillenwerfer decoys completely. Bold, a more sophisticated decoy officially designated Cobalt, was a 1M balloon coated with aluminum strips and filled with calcium hydride. Released from a submerged submarine, it rose slowly. When it reached shallower depths, seawater reacted with the calcium hydride to produce hydrogen gas, keeping the balloon neutrally buoyant. To radar, it appeared to be a submarine snorkel. To ASDIC, it produced a valid echo. But Bold had severe limitations. It could only be deployed from stationary submarines, it rose too slowly to protect a submarine during evasive maneuvers, and it didn't move horizontally. Any ASDIC operator who maintained contact for more than a few minutes realized the target wasn't actually a submarine. Absorbent hull coatings to reduce sonar reflection were researched extensively but never successfully deployed. The Germans called it Albrecht, after the dwarf in Wagner's opera who possessed a cloak of invisibility. The concept was sound. A rubber coating mixed with air bubbles would absorb incoming sonar pulses rather than reflecting them. Laboratory tests showed promise, but practical application proved impossible. The coating had to be several centimeters thick to be effective, it added tremendous weight, it degraded rapidly in seawater, and most critically, it couldn't withstand the pressure changes of deep diving. The coating would compress at depth, losing its sound-absorbing properties, then expand irregularly when the submarine surfaced, creating gaps and tears. After months of research and testing on captured U-boats, the Allies concluded Albrecht was ineffective. German scientists, working with even fewer resources, came to the same conclusion. The fundamental problem was that German engineers had spent 20 years developing pro-submarine technology, improving U-boats' ability to find targets, while largely ignoring anti-submarine defenses. When the Allies' detection systems matured, Germany had no effective response. The Kriegsmarine had assumed incorrectly that future naval warfare would resemble past patterns. They had prepared to fight the last war while the Allies had developed technologies for an entirely new kind of warfare. The human cost mounted with horrifying speed. In September 1942, 3,000 U-boat men were at sea in operational boats. By August 1944, 28,000 of the 40,000 men who had served in the U-boat force were dead. The survival rate for submarine crews fell below 30%. Every patrol became a near-certain death sentence. Yet the Kriegsmarine continued sending boats out even as green crews replaced the experienced commanders who had carried the early war's success. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, transferred to the larger Type IXD submarine U-234 in early 1944, wrote of the psychological breakdown among crews. The new men are terrified before we even leave port. They have heard the statistics. They know 3 boats out of 4 never return. When the sonar pings begin, some men weep. Others simply shut down mentally, staring at bulkheads, unable to function. The veterans try to maintain discipline, but we know the truth as well as the novices, we are sailing in iron coffins. The advent of snorkel technology in mid-1944 offered brief hope. This extendable breathing tube allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while remaining submerged, eliminating the need to surface for battery recharging. Boats could theoretically stay underwater for entire patrols. But Allied radar quickly adapted, detecting even the small snorkel head above water, and submerged U-boats, whether snorkeling or running on batteries, remained vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated sonar. The snorkel itself was Dutch technology captured when Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940. The original Dutch design was simple, a tube extending above the water surface to provide air to diesel engines while the submarine ran at periscope depth. German engineers refined the concept, adding automatic valves that sealed the tube when waves washed over it, preventing flooding. They also installed exhaust systems that vented diesel fumes underwater, eliminating the smoke plume that had made surfaced submarines visible for miles. In practice, snorkel operations were miserable. The submarine had to maintain precise depth control, keeping the snorkel head just above the surface. Too deep and the automatic valve would close, causing diesel engines to suck air from inside the boat, crew members experienced agonizing ear pain as pressure dropped suddenly. Too shallow and the conning tower would break surface, making the boat visible to aircraft and surface radar. Rough seas made depth control nearly impossible. Waves constantly washed over the snorkel head, causing the valve to open and close repeatedly. Each closure created painful pressure changes inside the boat. The noise was tremendous. Diesel engines running at full power inside a submerged submarine created a din that made normal communication impossible. Men shouted to be heard over the roar. The vibration was constant, rattling every fitting, making sleep impossible. Exhaust fumes leaked into the boat despite German engineering efforts, giving everyone headaches and nausea. After 12 hours of snorkeling, crews were exhausted, sick, and deafened. Worst of all, snorkeling didn't provide the invisibility German submariners hoped for. Allied radar operators learned to detect snorkel heads with increasing reliability. The small radar cross-section was challenging, but aircraft equipped with centimetric radar could pick up returns from the tube, especially in calm seas. Aircraft would then attack with depth charges or homing torpedoes, forcing the submarine deep and cutting short the battery charging cycle. Some boats were caught by surface escorts while snorkeling, detected by the acoustic signature of running diesel engines or by the wake created by the snorkel tube cutting through water. Allied operators had become expert at distinguishing genuine submarine contacts from false echoes. Training programs produced thousands of skilled sonar operators who could identify target characteristics, estimate submarine type from echo signatures, track evasive maneuvers, and direct weapons with lethal precision. The combination of improved equipment and experienced operators created a detection network that German submarines simply could not evade. British and American training facilities had standardized ASDIC instruction. New operators spent weeks in classrooms learning acoustic theory, how sound traveled through water, how temperature and salinity affected sonar beams, how submarine hulls reflected sound waves. They studied recordings of actual submarine echoes, learning to distinguish submarines from whales, wrecks, schools of fish, and thermal layers. They practiced on simulators that recreated hunting scenarios, developing the instant recognition skills needed in combat. By 1944, Allied navies were graduating ASDIC operators whose skills far exceeded those of the early war pioneers who had developed tactics through trial and error. These operators brought professional pride to their work. They competed to achieve the fastest detection times, the longest tracking durations, the highest percentages of successful attacks. The Royal Navy published monthly tables ranking ASDIC teams by performance. The best operators were awarded promotions and decorations. Their expertise became the stuff of legend. Stories circulated of operators who could identify specific submarine types by subtle variations in echo characteristics, who could track evasive maneuvers through temperature layers, who never lost contact once they acquired it. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won. On the invasion day itself, not a single Allied ship was lost to U-boats during the massive Normandy landings, despite desperate German efforts to interdict the cross-channel traffic. The sonar screen maintained by Allied escorts was so tight that U-boats attempting to approach the invasion fleet on June 6 were detected immediately and driven off or destroyed before firing torpedoes. Though U-boats would sink some ships in the days and weeks following the initial landings, the immediate invasion force crossed the channel unmolested by submarine attack. Admiral Donitz had ordered every available U-boat to attack the invasion fleet, 36 submarines deployed to the English Channel and western approaches. The mission was suicidal, and everyone knew it. The channel was shallow, restricting submarine maneuverability. Allied air supremacy was absolute, with hundreds of aircraft patrolling constantly. Surface escorts numbered in the hundreds, creating overlapping sonar coverage that left no gaps. Yet the order stood: attack the invasion fleet regardless of cost. U-boats equipped with snorkels fared slightly better than those without. U-84, commanded by Corvettan Captain Heinz Bedouin, managed to penetrate close enough to the invasion beaches to fire torpedoes at landing craft on June 8. The boat survived the attack and withdrew, though relentless ASDIC tracking and depth charging damaged it severely. U-984 was one of only 3 boats that successfully attacked invasion shipping and survived to tell about it. Most boats were not so fortunate. U-55 was detected by Aztec on June 9 while attempting to approach the invasion fleet. The frigate HMS Halcyon obtained contact and held it for 11 hours. The submarine dove deep, running silent, but the Type 147 Aztec tracked it perfectly in 3 dimensions. When Halcyon's depth charges ran low, the frigate HMS Tyndale took over the hunt, attacking with squid mortars. The second pattern struck U-55 amidships, cracking the pressure hull. The submarine sank with all 48 hands. U-821 was hunted for 14 hours by multiple escorts on June 10. The boat tried every evasive technique, diving to 300 m, releasing bold decoys, changing course erratically. Nothing worked. The Aztec contact remained solid. Finally, with batteries nearly exhausted and air almost unbearable, Captain Lieutenant Richard Beitzen surfaced to surrender. Allied ships rescued 37 survivors. 12 men had died during the depth charge attacks. The slaughter continued through June and July. Of the 36 U-boats committed to attacking the invasion, 25 were destroyed, 69% losses in 2 months. The survivors limped back to French ports, damaged, traumatized, their missions failures. Not a single troop ship or major warship had been sunk. A few landing craft and small vessels had been hit at a cost of hundreds of German submariners' lives and dozens of irreplaceable submarines. The ocean floor off Normandy became littered with U-boat wrecks. Allied forces conducting post-war surveys would count 17 U-boat hulls in the invasion area, most showing evidence of catastrophic depth charge damage. These wrecks became underwater memorials to the futility of sending submarines against an enemy with total sonar and radar superiority. The introduction of the Type 21 Electroboot in the war's final months represented German engineering's last desperate attempt to regain underwater superiority. These revolutionary submarines featured streamlined hulls, massive battery capacity, enabling sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots, and sophisticated acoustic quieting. Had they been available in numbers in 1943, they might have altered the battle's outcome. But only 2 Type 21 boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender, far too few and far too late to matter. The Type 21 represented a radical departure from conventional submarine design. Earlier U-boats were surface ships that could submerge temporarily. The Type 21 was designed to operate primarily underwater, surfacing only when absolutely necessary. The hull was streamlined like a torpedo, eliminating the deck gun, external torpedo storage, and other protrusions that created drag. This hydrodynamic design, combined with triple the battery capacity of conventional boats, allowed sustained underwater speeds that could outrun most surface escorts. The specifications were impressive. A submerged speed of 17 knots could be maintained for 90 minutes, a cruising speed of 6 knots could be sustained for 3 days without surfacing. The boat could dive to depths of 280 m, far deeper than Allied depth charges were typically set. Most revolutionary was the hydraulic torpedo reload system. The Type 21 could fire all 6 bow torpedoes, reload, and fire again in less than 20 minutes, all while remaining at action stations. German engineers had also addressed the sonar detection problem. The Type 21's hull was coated with synthetic rubber tiles designed to absorb Aztec pulses. The propellers were specially designed to minimize cavitation noise. Machinery was mounted on rubber isolators to reduce vibration transmission through the hull. The snorkel was improved with better valves and more efficient airflow. In theory, the Type 21 would be much harder to detect and track than conventional U-boats. Production began in late 1943 using prefabrication techniques copied from American shipbuilding practices. Submarines were assembled from 8 sections built in different factories across Germany, then transported to assembly yards for final construction. This modular approach allowed rapid production. 118 Type 21 boats were completed before war's end, with 4 reaching combat readiness. But the program was plagued by problems that stemmed from rushed development and scattered production. Quality control suffered badly. Sections built in different factories didn't align properly. Welds cracked under pressure. Electrical systems failed. The hydraulic torpedo system leaked. Most critically, the rubber coating designed to defeat sonar proved unreliable. It degraded in seawater, peeled off during deep dives, and actually increased rather than decreased the submarine's acoustic signature in some conditions. U-2511, commanded by Corvettan Captain Adalbert Schnee, completed the only genuine Type 21 combat patrol. The boat departed Bergen, Norway, on April 30, 1945, just days before Germany's surrender. Schnee's orders were to demonstrate the new submarine's capabilities by penetrating Allied patrol lines and reaching the North Atlantic. For 2 weeks, U-2511 operated off the British Isles, evading numerous Allied anti-submarine forces. Schnee detected several potential targets but held fire, following orders to avoid engagement unless circumstances were ideal. The patrol demonstrated both the Type 21's potential and its limitations. The submarine could indeed outrun escorts when detected, and its underwater endurance was extraordinary, but it was still vulnerable to ASDIC detection. Allied operators adapted quickly to the new acoustic signature. On several occasions, escorts obtained solid contacts and began hunting U-2511. Only the boat's superior underwater speed allowed it to escape. Schnee's patrol report filed after Germany's surrender concluded that while the Type 21 was a significant improvement over conventional U-boats, it was not invisible to Allied sonar. Given enough time, Allied forces would have developed tactics and technologies to counter it. U-3008, the only other Type 21 to complete a combat patrol, had an even less impressive record. The boat departed Kiel on May 1, 1945. Tasked with evacuating German personnel from Norway. It surrendered to Allied forces on May 9 without firing a shot. Post-war examination by British and American naval experts revealed the quality control problems that had plagued the program. The rubber coating was peeling in multiple locations, hydraulic systems leaked, electrical connections were corroded. The boat was operationally capable but far from the revolutionary weapon German propaganda had promised. For the German submarine crews who survived the war, the memory of sonar detection remained their most persistent nightmare. In post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans consistently returned to the sound of ASDIC pings striking their hulls. That metallic ringing, growing faster as escorts closed in, had announced their transformation from hunters into hunted. It had marked the end of U-boat invincibility and the beginning of systematic destruction. Herbert Verer, one of only 3 U-boat commanders whose boats survived the war still operational, immigrated to the United States in 1957 and became an American citizen. In 1969, he published Iron Coffins, his memoir of submarine warfare. The book's dedication read, "To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea." In it, he acknowledged the truth that had taken years to accept. We were defeated not primarily by superior courage or numbers, though both played roles, but by technology we did not understand and could not counter. The Allies learned to see through water. We never developed effective means to hide. Verer's path from defeated enemy to American citizen reflected a transformation that mirrored his wartime experience. After Germany's surrender, he spent 2 years in British prisoner-of-war camps, working as an interpreter and liaison between Allied authorities and German naval personnel. His fluent English and cooperative attitude earned him early release in 1947. He returned to Germany briefly but found a nation devastated physically and psychologically. The submarine service he had known was gone, the bases were rubble and the bunkers were filled with scuttled boats. Most of his comrades were dead. In 1952, Verer immigrated to the United States on a technical visa, sponsored by a marine engineering firm that valued his submarine expertise. He settled in Connecticut, working as a consultant on sonar and underwater acoustics. The irony was not lost on him, he was helping improve the very technology that had defeated Germany's U-boats. In 1957, he became an American citizen, swearing an oath to the nation whose sonar had hunted him through the Atlantic depths. Writing Iron Coffins became Verer's way of processing the trauma and honoring the dead. He spent 6 years researching, interviewing survivors, consulting war diaries, and patrol reports. The book, published when Verer was 49, became an immediate bestseller. American readers were fascinated by the first-hand account of submarine warfare from the enemy's perspective. German readers, particularly veterans, embraced it as honest testimony to their experiences. Unlike much German war literature that romanticized or justified Nazi service, Verer's memoir acknowledged the futility and horror of the U-boat war's final years. The book's reception was not universally positive. Some German veterans accused Verer of exaggerating Allied technological superiority to excuse Germany's defeat. A few American critics suggested he had inflated his own accomplishments and minimized German war crimes. Naval historians debated details and disputed statistics, but the core narrative, the story of German submariners encountering Allied sonar technology they could not counter, was accepted as fundamentally accurate. Verer continued working as a marine consultant until his retirement in 1985. He gave occasional lectures at the Naval War College and the Submarine School, sharing his experiences with American naval officers. He participated in several historical conferences and documentaries about the Battle of the Atlantic. In his later years, he became an advocate for German-American reconciliation, speaking at veteran organizations and schools about the futility of war and the importance of international cooperation. The statistics tell a stark story. Of approximately 1,160 U-boats commissioned during World War II, 785 were lost. 30,000 submariners died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in the war. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943, when Allied sonar systems matured. In the final 18 months of war, sending a U-boat on patrol was effectively sentencing the crew to death. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, the radio operator who had served on U-109 through the early years, survived the war aboard U-234, which surrendered in May 1945. In his diary's final entry, he wrote, "We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves invisible warriors. The enemy taught us that invisibility was an illusion. Their sonar stripped away our sanctuary. In the end, we were simply men trapped in steel tubes, waiting for the pinging to find us. It always did." Hirschfeld's survival was itself remarkable. U-234 departed Kiel on its final patrol in April 1945, carrying secret cargo bound for Japan. The boat was loaded with advanced weapons, blueprints, technical documents, uranium oxide samples, and 2 Japanese naval officers. The mission was to exchange German technology for Japanese raw materials, particularly rubber and rare metals. But Germany surrendered before the submarine reached Japan. Captain Lieutenant Johann Heinrich Feller, commanding U-234, faced an impossible choice: surrender to the Americans, continue to Japan, or scuttle the boat. Feller chose surrender, but not before destroying the uranium samples and classified documents. On May 19, 1945, U-234 surfaced off the coast of New Hampshire and radioed surrender intentions to the United States Navy. The destroyer USS Sutton escorted the submarine to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Hirschfeld and the crew became prisoners of war but were treated with remarkable courtesy by American authorities, who were fascinated by the large Type IXD cargo submarine and its unusual cargo. Hirschfeld spent 8 months in an American prisoner of war camp in Maryland. Unlike the brutal conditions in Soviet captivity, where many German POWs died, American camps provided adequate food, medical care, and humane treatment. Hirschfeld worked as an electrician, repaired radios, and taught German to American intelligence officers preparing for occupation duty. He was repatriated to Germany in January 1946. Returning to Hamburg, Hirschfeld found his family's home destroyed by Allied bombing. His father had died in a raid, his mother and sister had survived but were living in a refugee camp. Germany was devastated, divided, occupied. Hirschfeld worked various jobs: electrical work, ship repair, translator for British occupation forces. In the 1950s, he began writing his memoir based on the secret diary he had kept throughout the war. The book was published in Germany in 1972, providing Germans with an unsentimental account of U-boat life from a crew member's perspective rather than a commander's. Hirschfeld's diary entries from 1942 and 1943 documented the transition from confidence to terror as Allied sonar improved. Early entries described successful attacks, narrow escapes, and the camaraderie of the crew. Later entries recorded mounting losses, failed attacks, and the psychological breakdown of men who knew they were being hunted by technology they could not evade. The final entries from 1945 reflected not defiance but resignation. We knew the war was lost. We knew most of us would die. But we kept going because that was what warriors did even when the cause was hopeless and unjust. The technological lesson was stark: submarine warfare had fundamentally changed. The introduction of active sonar meant the oceans would never again hide submerged vessels as effectively as they had in the early war years. Every navy in the world studied the Battle of the Atlantic, absorbing the brutal education in underwater detection. Post-war submarine development focused on quieting, on acoustic signatures, on evading increasingly sensitive sonar systems. The cat-and-mouse game between submarine stealth and detection technology had entered a new phase that continues to this day. Modern submarine warfare owes its fundamental principles to the lessons learned in the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. Every navy invested in quieting technology to reduce sonar signatures. Hull designs emphasized acoustic stealth. Anechoic coatings to absorb sonar pulses became standard. Propeller designs minimized cavitation noise. Mechanical systems were isolated on sound-damping mounts. The goal was always the same: to restore the invisibility that German U-boats had lost when Allied sonar matured. The Soviet Union captured several Type 21 submarines and dozens of German engineers after the war. These became the basis for the Whiskey-class submarines that dominated Soviet naval construction in the 1950s. Soviet naval architects studied every aspect of the Type 21 design, particularly the sound-quieting features. They recognized that future submarine warfare would be dominated by the competition between stealth and detection. Soviet submarines incorporated rubber anechoic tiles, improved propeller designs, and machinery isolation systems derived directly from German Type 21 technology. The United States Navy conducted extensive tests on captured U-boats, particularly U-2513 and U-3008, both Type 21 boats surrendered in May 1945. American engineers were impressed by the streamlined hull form, the large battery capacity, and the hydraulic systems. These features influenced the design of the Tang-class submarines, America's first purpose-built post-war boats. The Tang class incorporated the teardrop hull shape pioneered by German designers, nearly doubling underwater speed compared to wartime fleet boats. Britain's Royal Navy tested U-2511 thoroughly, putting it through exercises against escort groups equipped with the latest ASDIC systems. The results were sobering. Even with improved sonar, detecting and maintaining contact with a fast, quiet, deep-diving submarine was extremely difficult. The exercises demonstrated that Type 21 boats, had they been deployed in significant numbers in 1943, would have posed a severe threat to Allied anti-submarine forces. This realization drove British submarine development for the next decade, resulting in the Porpoise-class boats that incorporated many Type 21 features. On the detection side, sonar systems grew exponentially more sophisticated. Passive arrays could detect submarines from hundreds of miles. Active sonar evolved into multi-frequency systems that could defeat most countermeasures. Computer processing allowed automatic target classification. The technological competition between submarine stealth and detection capability became one of the Cold War's central features, a direct legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic. American sonar development in the 1950s produced revolutionary advances. The SQS-4 sonar introduced in 1952 could track targets at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar towed behind surface ships on cables could be lowered beneath thermal layers to detect deep-running submarines. Sonobuoy networks dropped from aircraft created acoustic fences across strategic choke points. By the 1960s, American anti-submarine forces had created detection capabilities that exceeded World War II systems by orders of magnitude. Soviet submariners found themselves in the same position German U-boat crews had occupied in 1943, hunted by sonar technology that stripped away their underwater sanctuary. Soviet naval archives released after the Cold War revealed that submarine commanders in the 1960s and 70s described the psychological impact of Western sonar in terms nearly identical to those used by German submarine veterans: the persistent pinging, the knowledge that the enemy knew their position, the helplessness of being tracked underwater by invisible technology. The technological competition drove both sides to extremes. Soviet submarines became progressively quieter, using advanced propeller designs, sophisticated rubber coatings, and innovative propulsion systems. American submarines adopted similar technologies while developing even more sensitive passive sonar arrays. The competition reached its apex with nuclear-powered submarines, whose infinite underwater endurance made them genuinely capable of operating submerged for months at a time. But even nuclear boats remained vulnerable to acoustic detection. The fundamental lesson of the Battle of the Atlantic, that sonar could strip away submarine invisibility, remained valid. The human element remained constant. Submarine crews in all navies understood the lesson German submariners had learned so brutally: being detected meant being vulnerable. The distinctive ping of active sonar striking a hull triggered the same primal fear in American, British, Soviet, and French submarine crews that it did in German sailors. That sound meant the enemy knew where you were, could track your movements, could deliver weapons. The psychological reality of submarine warfare, shaped by the 1943 to 1945 experience, persisted unchanged. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, a small gathering of German submarine veterans met informally in the United States. Former U-boat men, some with their families, came to see the nation whose technology had defeated them. Herbert Verer, then 75 years old and long settled in America, spoke with several veterans about their shared experiences. "We came into the war believing in our invincibility beneath the waves," Verer said to the assembled group. "We were taught that the ocean depths protected us, that submerging meant disappearing. For a brief time, this seemed true. Then we encountered your sonar. That sound, that metallic pinging striking our hulls, taught us the ocean no longer hid us. We learned fear in a way surface sailors never know. We could not see our enemy, could not fight back, could only wait in darkness while your technology hunted us. We were defeated by science, by engineering, by the capacity of free societies to innovate faster than we could adapt. Those of us who survived did so mostly through luck. We honor our fallen comrades by remembering the truth. We were not supermen in unbeatable machines. We were young men in obsolete submarines sent against technology we could not overcome." The small group listened in silence. Then quiet acknowledgement passed between them, American and German veterans together, former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed impossible when those first sonar pings had struck German hulls in the early war years. They acknowledged the lesson written in 30,000 submarine graves at the bottom of the Atlantic: technological superiority combined with industrial capacity and scientific innovation had proven more decisive than courage, skill, or determination. The German U-boat experience with Allied sonar stands as one of history's clearest examples of how rapidly military technology can shift strategic balance. In 1939, German submarines were essentially invisible when submerged, hunted only through luck or obvious mistakes. By 1944, advanced sonar systems could track submarines continuously, plot their movements in 3 dimensions, and guide weapons with lethal accuracy. The underwater sanctuary had been eliminated through applied science and engineering excellence. For the men who served in U-boats, this technological revolution meant more than tactical defeat, it represented a fundamental psychological transformation. They had entered the war as invisible hunters, confident in their ability to strike and disappear. They finished it as marked prey, constantly detected, perpetually hunted, knowing that the ocean no longer protected them. The sound of sonar pings echoing through their hulls became the audio signature of their obsolescence. The broader strategic impact was decisive. British imports of food and war material, which had fallen to critically low levels by March 1943, recovered dramatically as U-boat effectiveness collapsed. The massive buildup of American forces in Britain for D-Day proceeded without significant interference. The Atlantic supply line, which Winston Churchill later called the only thing that really frightened me during the war, became secure. Germany's bid to strangle Britain through submarine blockade had failed, defeated as much by sonar as by depth charges and aircraft. In the final analysis, the story of German U-boat crews encountering Allied sonar is a story of technological surprise, adaptation, failure, and ultimate defeat. German submariners entered the war with justified confidence in their invisibility and ended it as the most casualty-prone military service of any nation. Between those 2 points lay 30,000 individual tragedies, men who drowned in iron coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic, victims of technology they could not counter. The sound that transformed submarine warfare, the metallic ping of sonar pulses striking steel hulls, carried a simple message: the ocean no longer hides you. Surface technology can reach into the depths. There is no sanctuary. For German submarine crews, this message arrived too late to save their lives, but early enough to shape submarine doctrine forever. Their experience, bought with 75% casualties, taught the world's navies that underwater warfare had fundamentally changed. Invisibility was no longer assured, detection was always possible. And in that possibility lay the end of submarine dominance as 1940 German U-boat commanders had known it. The legacy of those sonar pings echoes still, in every submarine that patrols beneath the world's oceans, in every detection system that searches for them, in every doctrine that seeks either stealth or detection. The German U-boat crews who first heard that terrible metallic ringing striking their hulls paid with their lives to teach a lesson that transcends their defeat. Technology transforms warfare faster than training, doctrine, or courage can adapt. Those who fail to recognize technological shifts in warfare do not merely lose battles, they lose entire campaigns, entire wars, and very often their lives. The iron coffins that litter the Atlantic floor hold 30,000 stories of men who learned too late that their ocean sanctuary had been stripped away by science. Their tale stands as testament to a profound truth: in modern warfare, technological superiority trumps traditional military virtues. The Allied sonar that detected German U-boats proved more decisive than the submarine's torpedo tubes, more effective than the crew's courage, more important than the commander's tactical skill. It was the weapon that ended the U-boat threat and secured Allied victory in the Atlantic. For the men who experienced its relentless pinging in the darkness beneath the waves, it was the sound that marked their transition from hunter to hunted, from invisible predator to exposed prey, from confident warrior to terrified victim of technology they could not escape.